since we went through that list of points, different Shen treatments, I thought we might look at a couple of things here. You'll see if you're in your handout, we've got this thing on insomnia and then depression. And this was my attempt to show how I use acupuncture in a kind of regulating way rather than just as a prescribed group of points. I felt that that's the strongest way to use acupuncture, that, oh, you have a syndrome diagnosis, and here's the points for that syndrome. That's like herbs. Herbs, you give the prescription of herbs, the person has to go home and drink them for a while. So there's a definite prescription. But acupuncture is more body work, isn't it? It's somehow regulating the chi flow. So the idea that we have this rigid, here's the 6-point prescription, you stick it in and that's it. That never quite appealed to me. It's certainly not the Korean tradition I studied. They feel it's a little more closer to massage than, acupuncture is closer to massage than herbs in a certain way. It's a yang technique, comes from the surface of the body, works a lot on the yang meridians. In the Korean tradition, they have some variations. For example, for acupuncture, the yang meridians are more important than the yin meridians a lot of times. They actually are covering a bigger area of the body, have more points. And so with our herbal perspective, we focus on yin organ diagnosis a lot more. From the acupuncture, we end up treating a lot of yang meridian points. The Korean tradition believes that more points can actually be better than fewer points. A lot of people say, if you could choose the one right point, oh, that would be the best treatment. My teacher would always be like, well, why would that be so? More points are better, as long as the points are done in some kind of coordinated way. It's not just like randomly do a lot of points. It's if the points reinforce each other, they actually sort of harmonize the chi flow around the body. In fact, my teacher would say, you can actually see a certain balance in your point selection in an almost aesthetic way. That he would always say, when you step back from your needling, the needles are retained in place, the treatment should look nice, he would say. That somehow that shows an inherent balance in what you've done. And I would frequently see him do a treatment and then step back and say, oh, and he put another point in, so that looks better. He felt it was devoid of any kind of use that point because it has a certain function. It just didn't appear balanced. So this slightly different way of doing acupuncture than we sometimes encounter. So let's look at this thing for insomnia. Now first, I should say, for sleep disorders in general, we should think about what is the process of sleep. It's that the yang has to go below the yin. That's why our senses turn inward instead of being open to the outside. The eyes close and all as that yang, and it's why our Shen is no longer engaged with the outside world. The yang is submerged under the yin. So anything that helps of yang being submerged by yin helps the process of sleep. So we should think about what's sometimes called sleep hygiene. Like, the bedroom should be, or where you're trying to sleep should be cool because that helps the yang to go down. Heat makes the yang come up. So you should have a cooler room. You should have a darker room. The colors should be more yin in the bedroom. You shouldn't have plants in your bedroom. Plants are living and therefore bring up the yang as opposed to, and we know in our modern thought that plants in the dark are actually consuming oxygen. So no use having that competition. This was the idea of Chinese medicine, that you want to create a yin environment. Practical sides to this sleep hygiene thing, and you shouldn't do things that disturb your Shen in bed. Like lay in bed and do your bills, or lay in bed and study or something. That actually, now again, for a person who has no issues of sleep, they don't have any Shen disturbance, they can get away with all these things, doesn't matter. But for the person who already has a tendency to some Shen disturbance, already has some sleep disorder, then it becomes so much more important that they try to have a more organized sleep hygiene thing. Even the so-called sleep ritual through which your body falls asleep. You know, when you go to sleep, people often do this elaborate thing of getting in just the right position in a certain way, their arm under the, and then at the moment they fall asleep, there's often a movement happens. They mess up all that stuff. That's where yin and yang exchange positions, creates that final movement. You can see this with kids if you watch them as they fall asleep. They often do that. And that sleep ritual is a learned behavior. It's actually a kind of a self-hypnosis by which you've learned to put yourself to sleep. And it's why it's often hard to sleep in a new environment when you're traveling or something. For some people, they have trouble reestablishing that sleep ritual. That is the process by which they get in the state where they allow yin and yang to exchange. I often counsel parents, be careful about creating a sleep ritual for your too elaborate, too difficult. You know, you'll meet those parents who have trained their kid to sleep by driving them around in the car, for example. Right? And the only way their kid sleeps in is they got to take them and they're driving around the block each night. Or, you know, you'll read these parenting books and they'll say, you know, white noise, this kind of random background noise, helps kids to fall asleep. So, for example, the sound of your vacuum cleaner. So some parents will come and they'll say to me, I've got my kid addicted to the vacuum cleaner now. The only way they'll sleep is I have the vacuum cleaner run. I mean, they got clean carpets for sure, but they, you know, it's a nuisance, right? Because what they've done is they've injected into the child's sleep ritual the need for these kind of... So don't do things that you don't want to do all the sleep ritual. Otherwise, you get stuck with it. So anyhow, that's sort of the sleep hygiene. Get the right circumstances for sleep. And how detailed you want to be on this, I think depends on the nature of the person. I mean, at the very least, they should reduce their caffeine intake. They come in complaining of sleep problems. I had a guy some years ago, it was so funny. He was arson investigator for the city of San Diego. And he was having terrible insomnia. And I asked him, are you drinking coffee? And he goes, yeah, I drink a fair amount of coffee. And I said, how much you drinking? He goes, you know, I'm not really sure. I said, well, try to reduce it to... He came back. He said, you know, I counted how much coffee I was drinking. 14. He wasn't even counting. They just had always coffee there. And, you know, he just drank it constantly. Well, probably if you have a sleep disturbance, that's not a good idea, you know, right? It's just Mountain Dew and like that. I had one insomnia patient who was drinking 2 1-liter bottles of Mountain Dew a day. Well, not only is that like how many gazillion spoons of sugar besides it's one of the highest caffeinated sodas. Now they have those Jolt and stuff that's even higher. But, you know, so people sometimes aren't aware of how much they're, so at the very least, that's the reasonable thing to talk about. But now we go into the actual treatment of the insomnia. First thing here is because yin and yang have to, yin and yang chow mai always are important in the ability to regulate the sleep rhythm. So you should always do bladder 62, kidney 6, and bladder 1, connecting the yin and yang chow mai. And this also is helpful for inverted sleep rhythms where people say I can only sleep in the daytime and not at night, things like that, especially shift workers, especially people who work jobs where they change shifts with frequent, they often get a really disturbed sleep rhythm. This kind of yin and yang chow mai treatment helps to reestablish. And then we have to be able to, I should have mentioned it, I also like to add gallbladder 1 in that point prescription. They say that regulating gallbladder 1 helps the eyes to close and fall asleep. Then that yang that has to descend past this obstruction of the neck, as we just mentioned, and we mentioned those points for the neck. Now, in the case of insomnia, particularly a few points, extra points are especially mentioned, like you have the Anmian point, or the Yiming point, or these extra points. I prefer the method I mentioned of neck and shoulders and treating any sensitive or tight places. So you can use specific points, or you can use tight points on the neck and shoulders. Now, since we're talking about this in a sort of sequential way, if I get a patient who has sleep disorders, maybe they have some other mental disorder where there's lots of yang in their head, and I touch their neck and shoulders and they're really tight or sensitive there, I may stop at this point and put the major focus of my treatment here, and in fact even treat them herbally to release that. And so I'm not treating some deeper level yet. I'm making sure that the body has the actual ability to regulate. If neck and shoulders, let's get that freed up. So now the exchange, and sometimes that cures the whole thing without dealing with kidney yin deficiency or calming the Shen or anything like that. So for example, we could use a formula like Chai Hu Guizhi Tang. Often called Pleurum and cinnamon decoction, right? Chai Hu Guizhi. It's basically Shao Chai Hu Tang and Guizhi Tang. This is a great relaxation formula for the neck and shoulders. It opens a little, and even better, if you have the ability to modify your formula, if you add and Chuanxiang. So that combination, Chai Hu Guizhi Tang with Gogan and Chuanxiang, is a great formula for chronic neck tension. I mean, you're going to find a lot of applications for that. As you see, as we'll go through in the next few minutes here, we're going to go through several different disorders, like even hypertension, things like that. Often there's a lot of constriction in the neck and shoulders. That formula really frees the flow of qi there. Chronic headaches due to neck trauma. I often joke about this formula being the anti-chiropractor formula. And I don't mean that against chiropractors. It's for the person who only feels good with adjustments. In fact, to the point that the chiropractor often says, I don't want to keep doing these frequent adjustments because you're going to end up with lax ligaments in your neck. Maybe they're a self-adjustment all the time, you know? Right? They're always having qi obstruction in their neck. And this formula helps to Andrews, you often encounter that patient in the clinic. You're walking into the treatment room and they're sitting there, before you talk to them, they always go, like that, trying to adjust their own neck, right? And so, you know, that hurt me, you know, just, I used to be able to do a great joke at this point, and I can't do it anymore. Because used to be, you know, on the airplane, they would give you the drinks in a kind of a stiff plastic cup. Nowadays, you notice they change. It's a kind of a very flexible plastic cup. That stiff plastic cup, I used to sneak that into my lecture, and when I'd say a self-adjusted, I'd stick that cup under my arm and crunch, and everybody would fall out of their chair, think it was really my neck. And I can't do that joke anymore, because I should buy some of them, find still some of those cups. Anyway, you should be aware of this formula for all of these kind of chronic neck problems. Somebody asked me just on the break about the forms of herbs I use in my clinical practice. I always like raw herbs for two reasons. They give us maximum flexibility, and they allow us to use large quantities of herbs, and the person still has to drink a relatively small amount of substance. The downside is they taste, the person has to cook them. So you just have to push past that compliance issue, and you have a lot of
live in Asheville, you just don't get it.
I don't get San Diego also, people are people everywhere. And as I always encourage practitioners, use raw herbs yourself if you expect to give them to patients. If you're very comfortable with it, it's much easier. You just don't have the resistance in your presentation to the person. But so I like raw form of herbs for that. But powders are really good. Also a lot of flexibility. More expensive than raw herbs. And the problem with powders, people tend to underdose. So if you're going to use powders, remember, especially this kind of practice where you assemble powders into formulas, the bigger your formula becomes, the more powder the person has to take. And what I see so often is the mistake made, a person will make, they sort of have a standard dose. You take 5 grams of this herbal powder, and then they end up adding 15 different herbs in there. Suddenly you're getting such a small amount of each herb. That wouldn't happen in a decoction. Because you keep adding 15 herbs, it's still all cooked together, and you still drink 1 cup of it at the end. But you start taking a powder, if you have 5 grams of a powder that has 4 herbs in it, you're getting 1.25 grams of each herb. Suddenly you put 15 herbs in there. How much are you getting of each individual one? You quickly drop below the level at which those herbs have any efficacy. That's the problem with powders. So if you're going to use powders, you say compliance is better, then you've got to use bigger amounts. Because I'm convinced for most herbal situations, dosage matters. It's not homeopathic. And so I often talk with practitioners. People often say, oh, you're lecturing a lot. You've done this a long time. Can I consult with you? And they tell me the case, and they tell me the formula, and it sounds right. And where I find the problem is dosage. The person just isn't taking enough of it. So powders are great, but think about dosage. And then tinctures and extracts can be really good too. Compliance is really good with those. Again, different tinctures, different extracts have way different potencies. And that has the least flexibility. With tinctures, you usually end up practicing in this method of combining formulas. You might have, in my practice, I usually had a lot of tinctures because I give those to kids. So I'd have, and maybe 60 different formulas, and I would combine those for the kids. But you don't have the real adjustability. So how would I do this? I might take, I might have Chai Hu Guizhitang as a set formula, but I want to put some Guggen in there. So you end up adding Guggen. Well, then that has some Ma Huang in it, but it really is okay with this formula. I can't add too much because then the Ma Huang starts to become a little more yang and stimulating than I wanted for this. Hard to add individually. Maybe I could add Su Tang, has blood tonics, and so you start to play around with combining formulas a lot when you use extracts. Same thing starts to apply at some point with those. You start mixing formulas together, you've got to up your dosage. Because again, if I mix 2 formulas together and you take the same amount of substance at the end, you're only getting a half dose of each formula. So you have to be thoughtful about dosage when you use prepared herbs. But I tell you, another attitude of the Korean tradition is that acupuncture can sometimes be even more effective than herbs for even internal problems. So they didn't have the bias that herbs are always better for internal problems. But in my practice, I find that the combination of herbs and acupuncture allows me to see the person less frequently. And patients really like that. So, you're doing your acupuncture, you're reinforcing that with your herbs in between visits. You can have more extended time between. So I really like the combination because of that. Anyways, that's sort of an aside about what I use, what I do with the herbs. So we have the potential of using Chai Hu Guizhitang right here as a neck releasing approach. Then this yang that had to descend. Yes, the yin and yang Chao Mai regulator. Yes, there has to be an opening through the neck so it can go down. And then the big descending pathway of the body has to be open. Big descending pathway is the Yang Ming. If the Yang Ming is blocked up or has heat, things cannot descend in the body. So we often, in our theoretical discussions, concentrate on lifting. Oh, the spleen chi lifts the central chi, and we always talk about prolapses where people are dropping organs out of their body when they're walking. There goes my bladder on the floor. All that's the spleen. Stomach is down, and that's a really important mechanism too. That's one of those pivots on our chart of the pivots that we looked at yesterday, is up and down motion. And in the case of insomnia and a lot of high affect mental disorders, the Yang Ming is unable to descend. So again, we look at the patient we're dealing with. In any case, I always add some points for the Yang Ming in any sleep-related treatment. There is a particular classical point prescription, which is a little funny, of stomach 44 and 45, and then a point on the third toe, like there was so we'll say the well point on the lateral side of the third toe. Did you notice I had to hesitate there? That's a kind of learning disorder where when you have to move things between speech and written word, you actually are using different sides of your brain. And I don't have learning disorders per se, but when you're lecturing and writing at the same time, there's often a little block for a moment there. I have to remember how to spell it. Well, you'll see kids where this is an exaggerate. These are kids who typically can't spell. They're actually having a problem, inability to move things from the verbal side to the written side. And so if you do these things that help body crossover, as we've been saying, the yin and yang chow mai, points on the midline of the body and such, they actually improve their ability to spell, not by studying spelling words, but they can suddenly make that verbal to written transition easier. This prescription is a particular prescription for sleep, and you can see it's just descending the yang ming. The stomach meridian actually splits and goes from into the third toe as well as the second toe, and so you're using that well point over there on the third toe as a way of, I don't think you necessarily have to do those points. You could use, how about if the person's actually constipated, 36, 37, and 39. We mentioned this group yesterday as a kind of purgation treatment. Herbally, if you see a patient who's, who, again, you're sequentially going through, and you may stop here. Now, the neck's not too bad in this patient, but boy, they're really congested in the yang ming. They have a lot of food retention, they have reflux, they have bloating, they may be very tympanic or hard in the upper abdomen. You could stop here and focus on that and use your herbal support for that. Do I need to use one of the chung chi tongs, one of those regulate the qi formulas that has a da huang in it that really purges, or do I want to use one of the xie xin tongs that drain the formulas that are good for retention in that area? You know, so I could choose that and say, I'm going to focus on clearing this yang ming for a little while. Maybe I even just need something mild, like one of our food retention formulas, like bao huan or something. That's particularly when the person can't sleep if they eat in the evening very much, or can't believe I ate a whole pizza and then I can't sleep. You know, that kind of more acute that you could just regulate the food retention in the stomach. So if that's the major area of obstruction, we can focus on that. But we should always at least pay some attention to it, make sure the yang ming is descending. Then, in order to have normalcy of sleep rhythm, we have to have, this we mentioned yesterday when we were talking about moxa on DO20 for kids or elderly patients. It could be even patients who are, you know, regular adults, not necessarily elderly, but you notice the sea of marrow empty. They're forgetful, they're dull-witted, they're not alert, they're overtired and stuff. You may say, I'm going to just put a little energy into the brain. Their sleep rhythm will become much more normal as a result, and it won't wake them up. It actually makes it easier to rest. A lot of these people with this emptiness of the sea of marrow are experiencing the too tired to sleep phenomenon. So actually tonifying there makes it more possible for them to sleep. So likewise, if this seems to be a major factor for the person, we should give them herb formulas that tonify the brain. So besides doing moxa on DO20, we could do a formula like we mentioned yesterday, Huan Xiaodan, recovery of youth formula. As that problem becomes more pronounced, we could use one of those formulas that have more Jing tonifying. Some people like to use that ginseng nutritive formula, Ren Shen Yang Ying Tong. It kind of tonifies all the organs and such. You know, so you get the idea. You just want to do something in the mind here. Huan Xiaodan. I recommend, if you practice pediatrics at all, to have this formula around, just because it's so good for kids with learning disorders and again, not alert and slow mental developers. We always have a saying in the pediatrics that a child who is slow to grow physically tonify the spleen. But a child who's delayed to develop mentally tonify the kidney. And so Juan Chaldon focuses on the kidney and brain. A spleen tonic per se is going to make them bigger. It's going to make them mentally more developed.
What about using adding placenta to that?
You know, placenta is it's a kind of blood tonic and blood mover besides its sort of nourishing quality. So I think that could be reasonable if I don't usually think of placenta as a main thing for development in kids, though. It is. It's like Jing. It's like human Jing almost. You're getting human substance. I don't know. It's just never been a.
Can you even do that anymore?
I haven't tried. It's not something it's different. Yeah, as it's true with. You know, I always hear that, right? I go around, people say, "Oh, I have trouble getting this herb or that," and you just call the herb suppliers, and they usually, "Oh yeah, we have that. Oh, it's not in the catalog. Well, we have some." You know. So, after all, a lot of the herbs that come in shipments that never get inspected. They only inspect a small amount. You know, once in a while, it'll be a particular supplier won't have an herb because that shipment got inspected and they rejected some. I tell you, the two Jing substances I mentioned yesterday I use a lot are turtle shell and deer antler. The yin and yang, that combination. And usually people put the gochidza and renshen together. And they seem to be really good. They're really very nourishing. And meat is important when you're trying to tonify Jing too. Meat. Yeah. So he said placenta, but even just animal protein is very tonifying to the people who are Jing deficient need animal protein. I think you have a Jing deficient vegetarian, you're going to have a struggle. You know, they need to borrow something from somebody. They just got to say to the animal, "Thank you very much. You're going along for a ride with me now. You know, I'm taking your Jing with me." We finally get to actually target the Shen. Because we have yin and yang able to move up and down through the open pathway of the neck, and yang ming has the capacity of descending, and the brain is functioning normally, now we can worry about the Shen, fine. So now we say, let's calm the Shen to help sleep, and we'll use the things we just talked about, Heart 7 paired with one of these other points. So, you know, here when I say Shen Men here, I mean Shen Men in the ear. This is a trick. Connect Heart 7 to Shen Men in the ear with an electric stim. Really regulates the sleep rhythm. Yeah. People, again, with funny sleep rhythms and in weird inverted sleep rhythm patterns and jet lag and stuff like that, heart in the ear really helps regulate the sleep rhythm. Yes.
Since your tradition likes a lot of acupuncture points, could you consider doing all of this in one session?
Yes, because it sounds like a lot when I go step by step and we talk about all the detail. But think about it in a way of, I said, okay, I'm going to do bladder 62, kidney 6, and bladder 1. Maybe gallbladder 1. So that's 4 points. Then I might add 2 points on the neck. I find 2 tight places, you know, I don't need to do a whole lot of points. I mean, if there was a lot of tension, maybe I'll use a little plum blossom, slide a cup around, something like that. But I'll maybe choose 1 or 2 points there. So we're up from 4 points to... Then I add something on the yang ming, maybe just stomach 44, 7 points. Then little moxa undo 20, okay, 8 points. Now I'll call them the Shen, heart 7, and one of these other 9, 10 points. So I'm up to 10 points, and there's one more step after this. So what do I get up to? 12, 15 points. My teacher would think that was really an okay number. We wouldn't be out of the realm of what was acceptable in one treatment.
You're always needling bilateral.
Yes, it's again in that family tradition. The rule was treat bilaterally unless there's a reason not to, because the theory was the body has to work to. If you only treat points on the upper part or the lower part, or only on the front and not the back, or only on one side, that actually forces the body to exert regulation. Whereas if you treat in a more balanced way, it's actually kinder. So the thought was, it's actually easier on the body to use more points covering a more balance than it is to use fewer points but localized in one area. So as my teacher would say, well, why would you just treat one side? Now, if there's a one-sided problem, or you think the chi is really out of balance left and right and you want to treat to fix that, then you can do one-sided treatment. That was just, again, this is always the thing of Chinese medicine. A certain way doesn't invalidate other methods. You might have a different strategy, and you might do a lot of one-sided treatment. It's just not what I was taught to do. And as I said, my teacher used lots of points. I say this way, you really have done a comprehensive. But you don't have to go through the whole thing. You can stop and focus on something and really get that regulated. And often in doing that, you don't even need to go further, because you've hit the place where the main obstruction is to the person's qi regulated. You come to the yang ming, and that's where they're really congested. You focus on that, you're herbally targeting that, and their mind is really empty. You focus on that, you're burning mox on do 20 and doing a lot of jing tonics. You stop there. But we can work our way right through this. Here we come to the finally, we're not finally, penultimate step, calming the Shen. So we use, heart 7 paired with something. A lot of people are nervous about electric stim on Shen Men. It really won't disturb the heart in a negative way. It won't cause palpitations, anything. So I just go Shen Men to Shen Men on each side of the body. Low frequency electric stim.